Did you know that the very first scene ever filmed for Carrie was almost cut completely because the director thought it was too strange? That one risky choice ended up becoming one of the most talked about opening moments in horror movie history. Carrie, released in 1976, is not just a scary movie. It is a story about a girl who just wanted to be seen. And behind that story, a world full of strange, surprising, and unforgettable secrets. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Carrie. Number 20. The book nobody wanted. Before Carrie became a movie, it was a novel. A short, painful, deeply personal novel written by a young man named Stephen King. But here is the twist. Stephen King did not even want the world to read it. He thought it was bad. He thought it was too dark, too strange, and too focused on a world he did not fully understand, the world of teenage girls. So he threw it in the trash. He literally crumpled up the pages and tossed them into a garbage bin. His wife, Tabitha King, found those pages. She read them quietly. Then she walked back to Stephen and told him something simple and powerful. She said the story was good. She said the girls in it felt real. Told him to keep going. Stephen King listened to her. He pulled the pages back out of the trash and finished the story. He sent it to publishers, and in 1974, Doubleday published the novel. It sold over 1 million paperback copies in its first year. A story that almost vanished forever became the beginning of one of the greatest careers in the history of American literature. And it all started because a wife believed in something her husband almost destroyed. Looked like garbage, turned out to be gold. Number 19. Brian De Palma almost didn't get the job. When it came time to turn Stephen King's novel into a movie, the studio did not immediately think of Brian De Palma. Several directors were considered. Brian De Palma was still a relatively young filmmaker in 1976. He had made a few films, but nothing with the kind of wide audience that a major studio release demanded. He was known for being creative and bold, but also for being a little unpredictable. The studio was nervous. However, De Palma had something that convinced them: passion. He read the novel and immediately connected with its themes of outsiders, cruelty, and explosive emotion. He talked about the film not as a horror story, but as a tragedy. He said Carrie was not a monster. She was a victim who ran out of choices. That idea, that the scariest thing in the film was not the blood or the telekinesis, but the loneliness, sold the studio. They gave him the job, and De Palma proved every doubt wrong. His camera work, his use of slow motion, his emotional precision, all of it made Carrie into something far more powerful than a simple, scary movie. It took a director who saw the heart inside the horror to bring this story to life. What started as uncertainty became one of the finest horror films ever made. Number 18. Sissy Spacek was not the first choice. When casting began for the lead role of Carrie White, Sissy Spacek was not at the top of anyone's list. The studio imagined someone more traditionally pretty, more polished, more obviously sympathetic. They looked at many young actresses. Some auditioned well, some had more name recognition. But Sissy Spacek did something in her audition that no one expected. She came in looking deliberately plain. She did not dress up. She did not try to look beautiful or movie star. She wore a simple dress, let her hair hang loosely, and walked in as if she truly were Carrie White, uncertain, quiet, and quietly burning with something deep inside. Brian De Palma later said that the moment she entered the room, the decision was made. In her eyes that was heartbreaking and frightening at the same time. That combination, sadness and fire, was exactly what Carrie needed to be. Sissy Spacek went on to deliver one of the most stunning performances in horror film history, earning an Academy Award nomination for the role. Not bad for a girl who was not even first on the list. What looked like a long shot turned out to be the only choice that ever really mattered. Number 17. Piper Laurie. Thought she was making a comedy. Piper Laurie played Margaret White, Carrie's terrifying, deeply religious, abusive mother. It is one of the most chilling performances in any horror film ever made. But here is something almost unbelievable. Piper Laurie thought the script was a dark comedy. She genuinely believed that the over-the-top religious speeches, the dramatic declarations, and the wild emotional intensity were meant to be funny. She treated the role almost like a satirical character, someone so extreme that audiences would laugh at her as much as fear her. She committed fully to that interpretation, playing Margaret with complete seriousness, while internally thinking the character was absurd. When she finally saw the finished film, she was stunned. The audience was not laughing. They were terrified. The very qualities she thought were comedic had translated into something deeply disturbing on screen. Her performance earned her an Academy Award nomination as well, making Carrie only the second horror film in history to receive acting nominations. Laurie played it as comedy. The world received it as nightmare. And somehow, miraculously, both things made the performance perfect. Number 16. The famous shower scene and its controversial opening. The very first scene in Carrie is set in a high school locker room shower. It is filmed in slow motion, dreamy and soft, and then it suddenly turns brutal when Carrie gets her first period and is mocked by the other girls. This scene was controversial before the movie even released. Studio executives were deeply uncomfortable with it. Some thought it was too graphic. Some thought it was unnecessary. Brian De Palma argued that the scene was essential. It established Carrie as someone completely isolated and humiliated, even in her most private moments, and it showed the cruelty of the other girls in a way that made the audience understand, even if they did not yet know why, that something dark was being set in motion. Palma fought hard to keep the scene. He won, and that opening, filmed with a beauty that quickly turns to horror, set the tone for everything that followed. It told the audience that this film was going to be emotional before it was scary. It told the story honestly. What looked inappropriate to some executives turned out to be the moral foundation of the entire film. Number 14. Sissy Spacek chose to sleep in her costume actors prepare for roles in many different ways. Some study mannerisms, some research deeply, some simply learn their lines and show up on set. Sissy Spacek did something unusual. In the days leading up to filming the prom scenes, she asked to keep her costume and her specially applied makeup with her, including the fake blood that covered her in the climax. She wore it home. She slept in it. She wanted to know what it felt like to exist inside that image for longer than just a scene. She wanted the discomfort of it to be real, the stickiness, the weight, the strange way people looked at her when she was covered in what appeared to be blood. She wanted her body to remember the feeling so that when the camera rolled, the exhaustion and humiliation would not be performed. They would simply be there. This kind of deep physical commitment to a role is rare in any performer, let alone one playing a fictional character in a horror movie. That level of dedication bled, quite literally, into every frame. What you see on screen is not acting pretending to be discomfort. It is discomfort that was never fully washed away. Number 13. The split-screen finale was inspired by opera. The climactic prom sequence in Carrie is filmed using a split-screen technique, 2 or more images on screen at the same time, showing different things happening simultaneously. It creates a feeling of chaos, of things spinning out of control, of the world coming apart in multiple directions at once. Brian De Palma did not invent this technique, but he used it in a way that felt completely fresh. His inspiration was not another horror film or even another action sequence. It was opera. Palma spoke in interviews about being moved by the way opera stages multiple emotional events at the same time, music, voices, staging, and emotion all overlapping and intensifying each other. He wanted the prom sequence to feel like an opera. He wanted the viewer to feel overwhelmed in the same way an opera can overwhelm, not by a single clear event, the collision of many events. The result was a sequence unlike anything horror audiences had seen before. Tragedy and fury and fire all playing out at the same time, each one feeding the others. What looked like a technical trick was actually a deeply artistic choice, and it changed the way filmmakers thought about how to show chaos on screen. Number 11. Stephen King hated the first cut. Stephen King saw an early cut of Carrie shortly after filming was completed. His reaction was not positive. He felt the film was too slow in places, too focused on the visual style at the expense of the story's emotional core. He was concerned that some of the novel's most important moments, particularly the town's reaction to the disaster and the documents that frame the story, had been removed entirely. He also felt that the character of Carrie was not given enough quiet moments, enough space to breathe before the explosion at the end. King and De Palma had a respectful but honest disagreement about what the film needed to be. De Palma held his vision. He believed the film worked as a piece of cinema, even if it departed from the book. The studio agreed with De Palma. The film was released as he intended. And then something unexpected happened. Audiences and critics responded with enormous enthusiasm. The film was praised as a masterpiece. Stephen King, watching the reaction unfold, acknowledged that De Palma had made something real and powerful, even if it was different from what he had imagined. Two visions of the same story. One became a classic, and the argument between them made both better. Number 10. The town of Chamberlain was never real. The fictional town of Chamberlain, Maine, where Carrie White lives, has become one of the most recognizable settings in Stephen King's entire universe. Fans often imagine it as a specific, real place, a small, cold, gray New England town where something dark always seems to be just beneath the surface. But Chamberlain does not exist. It was entirely invented by King, and in the film, it was not even filmed in Maine. The production was based in California, using various locations around the Los Angeles area to create the look of a small, isolated American town. The high school was a real school. The streets were dressed with props and costumes to feel like a different decade, a different climate, a different world. The cold feeling of the film, the sense that Chamberlain is a place where hope goes to die, came entirely from performance, lighting, and storytelling, not from geography. The town that audiences believe in so deeply, the town that feels so specific and real, was built from nothing. It only exists on screen. And somehow, that is the most Carrie thing of all, something that feels painfully, unmistakably real, but was never there. Number 8. Amy Irving was almost the lead. Amy Irving, who played Sue Snell, the girl who feels guilty for how Carrie was treated and who sends her boyfriend Tommy to take Carrie to prom, almost had the lead role instead. Casting process, Brian De Palma was drawn to Amy Irving's quality and asked her to screen test for Carrie White as well. She did the test. She was compelling and emotional and clearly talented. When the tests were reviewed side by side, Sissy Spacek's version of Carrie had something that Amy Irving's did not, a quality of complete believability in Carrie's isolation. Sissy Spacek seemed to disappear into the character. Amy Irving seemed to be playing the character. It was a subtle difference, but in a film this intimate and this emotional, it was everything. Amy Irving was cast as Sue Snell instead, and she delivered a beautiful, haunted performance in that role. She was also the hand that emerged from the grave in the film's final scene, a fact that connects her character's guilt to Carrie's memory in an almost poetic way. Two girls, one role, and the choice between them shaped everything that followed. Number 7. The prom queen vote was rigged on and off screen. In the story, the prom queen vote that crowns Carrie is rigged by the cruel students who plan to humiliate her. They stuff the ballot box so that Carrie wins, knowing that once she is standing in front of everyone, they can dump the blood on her. It is a cruel, calculated act of social violence. But here is a strange fact. The vote in the film almost had to be rigged off screen as well. During production, the crew held a mock vote among the cast and crew to decide who they thought should be queen in the film's internal world, not as part of the plot, but to help establish the social dynamics of the prom. Many crew members voted for one of the more conventionally glamorous actresses. Almost no one spontaneously voted for Sissy Spacek's Carrie. That, according to De Palma, was actually valuable. It showed that the instinct to overlook Carrie, to not see her, was entirely natural. The world of the film reflected the real world in that moment. That made the tragedy more honest. Not just actors playing cruelty, but a system that was already quietly, naturally doing what systems do to people who do not fit. Number 6. John Travolta almost did not return for the reshoots. John Travolta played Billy Nolan, the wild and dangerous boyfriend of Chris Hargensen, the girl who engineers the humiliation at the prom. Billy is not a major character, but he is essential to the plot because he is the one who actually rigs the bucket and pulls the rope. By the time reshoots and additional photography were needed, John Travolta was becoming extremely busy. Saturday Night Fever was in production, and his schedule was tightening rapidly. There was a real concern that he might not be available to complete his scenes in Carrie. The production worked carefully around his schedule, sometimes shooting his additional scenes in compressed windows of just a few hours. Travolta committed to finishing the job. He showed up and delivered. And shortly after Carrie was released, Saturday Night Fever made him one of the biggest stars in the world. The timing was almost impossible. The commitment was total. What could have been a scheduling disaster became a small miracle of coordination. A young man racing between two productions, almost too busy to finish either one, became a legend because of both. Number 5. The score was almost entirely rewritten. The music of Carrie, composed by Pino Donaggio, is one of the most emotionally effective film scores of the 1970s. It moves between something beautiful and delicate and something dark and menacing with extraordinary skill. But that score was almost completely different. Brian De Palma had originally worked with another composer, and the early drafts of the score were darker, more conventionally horror-driven, heavy, oppressive, and frightening throughout. De Palma felt the music was fighting against the emotional story he was trying to tell. He did not want the audience to feel only fear. He wanted them to feel sadness, recognition, and tenderness for Carrie, even as terrible things happened. So he brought in Pino Donaggio, who had worked with De Palma before, and asked him to create something that could hold both feelings. Donaggio composed a score that was, in places, almost heartbreakingly beautiful. The main theme for Carrie sounds less like horror and more like a lullaby for someone who never got to sleep safely. It was a radical choice. It made the film's violence feel more upsetting, not less, because the beauty of the music made what happened to Carrie even more wrong. Sound shaped the soul of the story, and the right composer made all the difference. Number 4. The film was shot in just 30 days. Given the complexity of the production, the practical effects, the large cast, the elaborate prom sequence, the fire, the destruction, it might surprise you to learn that Carrie was shot in approximately 30 days. That is an extremely tight schedule, even by the standards of 1976 Hollywood productions. Brian De Palma was known for being efficient on set. He did meticulous preparation before filming began, storyboarding almost every scene in detail so that when the camera rolled, he knew exactly what he needed. This preparation allowed him to move quickly without losing precision. The cast was equally well prepared. Sissy Spacek and Piper Laurie arrived knowing their characters deeply, which meant fewer takes were needed to capture the emotional truth of their scenes. The crew was professional and experienced, and still, 30 days is remarkable for a film of this scope. Some sequences were shot in a single day that might have taken another director a week. The prom climax, with all its rigging and fire and slow motion and split-screen requirements, was shot in intense, concentrated bursts. What looked like an enormous production was executed with the speed and focus of something much smaller. Discipline made the impossible possible. Number 3. The film made Stephen King famous. Stephen King had published Carrie as a novel in 1974. It sold well, but it was the release of Brian De Palma's film in 1976 that transformed Stephen King from a successful author into a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, people who had never read the book went to see the film, and then went to find the book. Publishers who had passed on King's work before began paying attention. Film studios began looking at his other stories with new eyes. His second novel, Salem's Lot, was already in the works. His third, The Shining, was in progress. But the Carrie film created a wave of interest that lifted all of those stories at once. Without the film, King's career might have grown more slowly, more quietly. With it, the growth was explosive. De Palma's Carrie did not just adapt a book, it launched an empire. Every horror story King has ever told, every movie made from his work, every television series, every castle of fear he has ever built, all of it traces a line back to a crumpled manuscript that his wife pulled from a trash can and a film that showed the world what that story could become. One movie, an entire universe unlocked. Number 2, Sissy Spacek was nominated for an Oscar, the first time a horror actress ever was. When the Academy Award nominations were announced for 1977, something happened that had almost never happened before in the history of Hollywood. An actress who appeared primarily in a horror film was nominated for Best Actress. Sissy Spacek was recognized by the Academy not as a genre actress, not as someone who had done impressive work in a disreputable corner of cinema, but simply as a great actress who had delivered a great performance. Alongside her, Laurie was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. 2 horror performances, 2 Oscar nominations. The Academy was acknowledging something that horror fans had always known, that great acting is great acting, regardless of what genre surrounds it. The nominations sent a message to Hollywood that could not be ignored. Horror was not just entertainment for teenagers or cheap thrills for a drive-in audience. Horror, done with craft and intention, could be art. Carrie proved it. And the Academy's recognition meant that the conversation about horror in serious cinema would never be quite the same again. That was not a genre film getting lucky. That was the genre demanding to be taken serious. And it was. Number 1, the ending Stephen King wrote, was even darker. The ending of Brian De Palma's Carrie is shocking. The prom is destroyed. The town is devastated. Carrie returns home, reconciles briefly with her mother, is stabbed, and then kills her mother in self-defense before the house collapses on both of them. The final image, the hand from the grave, leaves the audience shaken and unsettled. It is a dark ending. But the ending Stephen King wrote in the novel was even darker. In the book, the destruction Carrie causes does not stop at the prom and her house. She tears through the entire town on her way home, destroying gas stations, toppling power lines, and setting off explosions throughout Chamberlain. The town is left in ruins. Dozens more people die. The novel frames this through documents, newspaper reports, government investigations, survivor testimonies that describe the aftermath as a kind of local apocalypse. The scale of destruction in the book is enormous. De Palma chose to concentrate the horror more tightly, keeping it personal, keeping it focused on Carrie's immediate world rather than expanding it into a disaster movie. This was a creative choice that many argued made the film more emotionally powerful. The narrower the destruction, the deeper the grief. The film kept the heart of the story even as it pulled back the scope. And in doing so, it made Carrie's pain feel less like a disaster and more like a tragedy. Which, of course, is exactly what it always was. Bonus fact, the mirror scene. That broke everything and fixed everything. There is a scene in Carrie that almost no one talks about when they list their favorite moments. It comes fairly early in the film, before the prom, before the blood, before the fire. Carrie is alone in her room. She stands in front of a mirror. She is wearing an old dress, her hair loose, the light in the room dim and sad. She looks at herself, and then, very slowly, she begins to practice smiling. Not because she is happy, but because she is trying to learn how. She is teaching herself to be the kind of person she has never been allowed to be. It is a small scene. It is quiet. There is no special effect, no shocking image, no jump scare. But Brian De Palma almost cut it. He felt the film's pacing needed to move faster toward the prom, and this quiet moment slowed things down. His editor convinced him to keep it. She told him that this scene was the reason the rest of the film would hurt. Without seeing Carrie try to smile, the audience would not fully understand what was being destroyed when the blood fell. The moment of hope had to exist so that the destruction of that hope would feel truly unbearable. De Palma kept the scene, and in preview screenings, audience members who had been laughing or chatting fell completely silent during it. Some cried. No blood, no horror, just a girl in a mirror trying to smile. That was the real monster in the film, not Carrie's power, but the world that made her afraid to use it. One small scene, the whole film in a mirror. Carrie is not really a horror movie. It is a story about what happens when a person is never seen, never heard, and never given a single moment of kindness. It is a story about what cruelty does, not just to its victims, but to everyone in its orbit. Brian De Palma, Sissy Spacek, Piper Laurie, and everyone who made this film in 1976 created something that goes far beyond scares. They created something true. And truth, even when it is painful, is the most powerful thing a story can offer. The next time you watch Carrie, or if you are watching it for the very first time, remember all of this. Remember the trash can that almost swallowed a masterpiece. Remember the wife who believed. Remember the actress who slept covered in red syrup so that her discomfort would be real. Remember the director who borrowed from opera to show chaos, and the composer who wrote a lullaby for a girl who was never safe enough to rest. Every movie hides a truth, and Carrie's truth is this: kindness is not weakness. It is the only thing powerful enough to stop the fire. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.